That's it. We are live. Hello and welcome everyone to the 37th episode of the IET India Digital Conversations. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you, as well as your near and dear ones, are all keeping safe through these difficult times. My name is Suman Bhaumik, and I'm your host for this series, and I also lead the events development for the IET in India. But before we begin our session today, I will take a little bit of time to talk about a little on IET and a little bit on the session. The Institution of Engineering and Technology, also known as the IET, completed 150 years of being a global organization, inspiring, informing, and influencing the engineering community to engineer a better world. As a diverse home across engineering and technology, we share knowledge that helps make better sense of the world to solve challenges that matter. At IIT India, we want to grow actionable knowledge, want to solve India-centric engineering issues, and want to enhance people's lives using technology and thought leadership to drive innovation. Here's a short video about who we are and what it is to be part of the IIT family.
Sumit, are we waiting for something?
Yeah, I'm just giving a little bit introduction about the IIT, Dr. Varanasi, and then
Just want to make sure that I'm connected.
Our world is changing.
Engineering is changing.
Society is changing.
We are changing.
We're here to inspire,
Inform.
Influence.
And change perceptions.
Demonstrating how important engineers and technicians are in our lives.
Championing achievements.
Helping to create new technologies that enable us to thrive.
And inspiring future generations to make a difference.
Together, we discover new concepts by turning theory into practice.
Create solutions to society's biggest challenges.
Share knowledge and expertise through our networks.
Grow by developing new skills and capabilities.
Evolve and adapt for the future.
We are the IET.
Together, we are engineering a better world.
Well, there it was, a refreshing video right there. If you want to know more about us, please do visit our website or get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to explore more on this. Now, coming to the matter at hand and about our conversation today, which is on disease surveillance, the why and the how. Our nation, India, has traditionally focused on surveillance for communicable or infectious diseases, and sustainable progress has been achieved, like the eradication of smallpox in 1977, elimination of polio in 2014, reduction in the incidence of HIV or TB and malaria. India has substantially reduced the incidence of HIV infections by more than half in the last 2 decades. And the system has shown its resilience also during the times of COVID and earlier during the Nipah virus outbreak. Traditionally, the role of tracing outbreak of diseases has been performed by the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, or the IDSP, with assistance of both local, state, as well as the municipal governments. However, this time, I think it's right about time that we build a robust, and a disease surveillance system, and we have all the directions for an enhanced disease surveillance and people-centric services, through the National Health Policy of 2017, and built from the existing surveillance system, which I think is mainly focused on data entry and upload to technology-driven centers with alignment with the National Health Mission and Ayushman Bharat. We are thankful to the Healthcare Working Group of the IIT Future Tech Panel, who have been instrumental in curating this session today and helping us get some of the best experts from the healthcare fraternity, who will be discussing the benefits, identifying the gaps, and also provide valuable insights on the solution side to build a robust disease surveillance system in India. So without any further ado or delay, let us introduce our speakers now. Introducing our first speaker, Dr. Sudhakar Varanasi, who is a well-known healthcare consultant and the founder of the 108 service. After his stints with firms like Tiger Software, Satyam Computers, EMRI, which pioneered large-scale deployment of emergency services for the first time in India under a private partnership model, He helped set up statewide ICT platforms across Andhra Pradesh to reach 3 million farmers in villages to bring about financial inclusion as a CEO of Co-options Technologies back in 2007. In the social sector, he was the chief mentor at Emergent Institute and CEO at Nama Bangalore Foundation. He currently holds Chief of Strategy position at Sriramsoft, a big data analytics company in Hyderabad. Our second speaker is Kiran Anandam Pillai, who is currently the advisor on technology at the National Health Advisory, or the NHA. He supports NHA to create digital public goods.
For the last half an hour.
Just a minute, I think there is some disturbance there. Okay. So as I was saying, he supports NHA to create digital public goods under India's two large digital health initiatives, the National Digital Health Mission, or the NDHM, and the Ayushman Bharat. He was a volunteer with UIDAI for the Aadhaar program and is currently a volunteer with iSpirit Foundation, where he works on the health stack. He dedicates his time to drive impact in healthcare. He is the founder and CEO of iDrishti, a social impact eye care provider that delivers high quality healthcare, or high quality eye care. iDrishti currently manages 12 eye hospitals across Karnataka, India. Our third speaker is Neeraj Jain, the country director for PATH. He oversees the strategic and programmatic engagement and financial operations for Matrix of global and in-country programs implemented across PATH's offices in India to ensure that PATH innovative across different public health verticals like TB, HIV, neglected tropical diseases, maternal and newborn health, nutrition and immunization has the maximum impact. He also represents PATH to governments, policymakers, the global and the Indian health community, donors, and media. And finally, coming to the moderator of the session today, Dr. Sumit Kad, who leads the enterprise business at Roche Pharma India, one of the leading pharma and biotech companies in the world, focusing on bringing targeted treatments to chronic diseases patients in India. In his stints with organizations such as IBM, he designed the direction for the transformative healthcare and life sciences solutions that led engagement with key industry executives in helping transform their business strategies to define new models for care, revenue generation, and improved care experiences. I should request Dr. Sumit to take over the proceedings now and start the conversation today. And I'll be in the backstage until you need me. Over to you, Dr. Sumit.
Sure. Thank you, Suman. Good afternoon and welcome all. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and in good health. To begin with, I would like to thank first IIT for enabling this wonderful discussion and bringing us all together. Our elite panelists who are experts in their different different domains to come up and share their insights, and of course our wonderful audience who has joined us from different geographical locations to hear out and of course give their viewpoints, which we'll take it as Q&A at the end of the discussion. Okay, Suman has given a very good context setting, so I will not waste much time going into that. But just to give a brief overview about disease surveillance, which is actually a system that uses digital technologies to collect data from multiple sources in real time or maybe near real time, and can help indicate the potential of disease outbreaks in certain locations, thereby enabling the government and healthcare bodies to take necessary steps to control the situation. This disease surveillance has been undertaken by various countries, including India, for a lot of years, and many Western countries have been doing so already, using technology a lot in the recent years. So for instance, if you remember a few years back, there was an outbreak of Ebola. And just before the World Health Organization declared the Ebola epidemic as a pandemic, okay, there was an organization in US which used a software that mines social media. So just they were able to kind of use this infectious disease surveillance system and was able to pick up instances of some hemorrhagic fever. And they declared before WHO, they were able to pinpoint that such kind of epidemic is being transferred to different cities, and they picked up data from websites, local news sites, social networks, and they correlated with Ebola outbreak. So that was the power of technology in helping in disease surveillance. So I would like to bring our first panelist, Kiran, into the discussion. So Kiran, over the years, the Indian surveillance system, which has been evolved, but is in silos and fragmented. I know this IDSP, they cover around 22 infectious diseases, but I want to know that how the launch of India Stack can augment the utilization of such a program, not only from the IDSP perspective, but an overall disease surveillance perspective, and how it can be integrated, which can accelerate the growth of disease surveillance and monitoring program in India.
Sure. Thanks, Sumit, and very happy to be here. Thank you to the IET for this very interesting topic, which is, of course, absolutely relevant in our current times. So, Sumit, like you rightly said, and I think India has made significant investments, and the IDSP program is actually considered, very, very good, including a good IT infrastructure. In fact, they recently rolled out an updated IT infrastructure, but as you rightly said, it kind of currently is restricted to the set of disease that are being notified for that IDSP program. So even last year, when COVID started, for example, when the COVID pandemic broke out, the only way that the government could actually start digital tracking and provide information for itself as well as to all of us was by creating a new set of tools. So, we had ICMR create a brand new set of tools where people had to report tests. Then we had the MHFW create tools where hospitals were reporting where the patient statuses were and so on. So we had to kind of get together and cuddle and kind of put together a new set of tools when this kind of a pandemic is a disease broke out. And so it's quite possible that when the next one, maybe not COVID, something else breaks out, we are back doing the same thing. So clearly there is an opportunity to create a set of rails, a set of things that could actually have made it much more easier. The biggest challenge with these new type of tools that we bring ad hoc is the fact that we are pushing a change down onto our healthcare providers. So they're now having to do something additional, apart from whatever they are doing as their normal path, just for the process of reporting. Now, one of the things that this was visualized, that there is the need for these rails. So the National Digital Health Mission is an initiative that actually has started in terms of the thought process about 3 years ago. It started with a document that NITI Aayog released called the National Health Stack. And then subsequently, the Prime Minister announced the mission actually right in the middle of COVID. So August 15th last year was the official launch of the National Digital Health Mission. And so what the National Digital Health Mission, one of the key things that it tries to do is it tries to essentially make sure that we have health data being able to move for a variety of different purposes. So when I say purposes, one of the most key purposes that the National Digital Health Mission focuses on is the ability for healthcare providers to actually share digital health data in a standardized way with their patients, and then allows patients to further then share it with whoever they want, other healthcare providers, mobile apps, insurers, or so on, with a consent-based kind of an architecture. Now, because these digital rails are being put where every healthcare provider who is creating any digital health data is going to participate, that means it will include all labs, most hospitals, clinics in the country as we kind of go along. And for the purpose of surveillance, the second thing that the National Digital Health Mission does is, from the same integration that's happening, it enables what we call as aggregated data sets and some anonymized data sets to also go. So one of the rails that's being laid out as we speak, and we can talk more about this as we kind of go along in this talk today, is the fact that the National Digital Health Mission will actually provide a new way where, without each hospital and lab having to actually make changes each time, if in their line of business using the existing software they have, they can get their software to be compliant, and you would essentially have a way by which both personal health information could be shared as well as certain aggregated data information could be shared. And this aggregated data information is going to be very useful for a lot of different policy purposes, but specifically also for the purposes of disease surveillance. So let me stop there at that, and then kind of have you pick up the threads with the others and then come back to this. Did we lose Sumit? I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, better.
Okay, sorry, some technical glitches. So Kiran, you brought a very valid point in terms of how it can be linked at a at a very basic primary health system level with use of technology. With that, I would like to bring Neeraj into a discussion So Neeraj, you have a great amount of experience in kind of working around the aspect that how it can be integrated at the very primary basic level. Now, this health surveillance in India is often considered as a very separate activity. It's not related directly to healthcare service delivery. It has worked in silos so far. So why do you think that has happened so far? Okay, and moving forward, how it can be better positioned, and more importantly, how it can be integrated with the primary health system, because the disease surveillance program across India, it has to cut through all the health system that we have, primary, secondary, and tertiary. But it's very important that it's very well integrated with the primary at the very basic health system level. So how that can happen moving forward, Neeraj?
Thanks, Sumit, and thank you, IET, for inviting me to this extremely important conversation. Since the COVID hit, everybody's been talking that disease surveillance is the need of the times. Actually, I want to say that disease surveillance was the need before COVID, because if we had that, then we would have been in a much better position to have dealt with it. And, Kiran sort of also hammered onto that point. So I think we failed on disease surveillance. In terms of how we were unfortunately able to manage COVID, if I were to call it that. Having said that, it's an opportunity. COVID has given us an opportunity because everybody is sitting there and saying, guys, this is a reality. We need to get our disease surveillance system working, because if we don't, then God knows what's going to hit us. And so as a public health person, I'm thrilled that there are conversations. I mean, you're having a conversation around disease surveillance. I don't remember the last time I was on a panel talking only about disease surveillance. So thank you so much for doing this. And I'm really looking forward to a big change in the next year or so. I think, the focus of the Indian health system till now has been really on reproductive, maternal, child health. I think that's sort of been one major focus area. And then there's been select communicable diseases. We've got a TB program, which is pretty robust, doing some great work. We've got NACO does some great work on the HIV program. So you have these silos which have got created, which are already there. There is also a great cadre of our frontline workers or our community health workers, which are absolutely critical if we want to get our disease surveillance systems working well. So that already exists. And I think with the government setting up the whole idea of health and wellness centers, Ayushman Bharat, the focus on primary healthcare, I think we are in a very good situation to actually change the entire landscape. Having said that, we still have lots of work to do. Just to update, I think what we saw last year was the IHIP, or the Integrated Health Information Platform. That came into being, which came within the IDSP, of course, which we're talking about. I think the idea was to launch a public health surveillance for epidemic-prone diseases. However, still it is fairly limited. It's not got the geographical spread that's required. And I think even the features, what information to collect, etc., that's still being figured out. Having said that, probably that's the direction we need to go. We need to strengthen that, and at least from a public health or a government information perspective, from the public system, we should be able to control, should be able to have most of the information coming in through that. I think on the other side, there's a whole private sector. Now, how are you going to get the private sector to also share disease surveillance data? And I think Nikshay has done that pretty successfully. I want to really say that it's one of the best systems. It's our TB management system. It's working quite well. So I think that gives us a direction of saying, how does the private and the public come together? Because disease is, disease doesn't look at whether it's public health or it's in the private sector, and who's the doctor and who's the, where is the information actually sitting. The information needs to come into the system, and the health stack. It's a great initiative, and I'm really, I think I need to compliment the government for going in that direction. It's not going to be as easy as it was for what we did with the India stack, but I'm really looking forward to at least some sort of structure coming in with the help of that. What will need special attention is surveillance in urban areas, because we actually don't have community health workers in urban areas in India. While, when we talk about the ASHAs, unfortunately, we talk about the ASHAs as if they exist everywhere, but they don't. They only exist in our rural settings. So how are we going to get urban data? And in COVID, we've seen, right? Entire data was mostly urban until the second wave, and that too, it's been scattered. But yeah, I think that's going to be one large challenge. How are we going to do that, and how are we going to start getting them in? I think in terms of integrating with the primary health system, I think we will have to scale up IDSP, expand it to non-communicable diseases, which doesn't exist today, which is also absolutely critical to be part of the disease surveillance system. I think it'll have to move to the primary health care centers, and I think that process is already on, which we need to push forward for. We'll have to multi-skill our frontline workers, our community health workers. We'll have to figure out how we can simplify data collection right from that level. And we'll also have to reorient a lot of the health information platforms that exist. You've got, we work on TB and HIV, and we actually are not even able to figure out comorbidities and how to deal with those comorbidities from a single system. There's a separate system for HIV, there's a separate system for TB. There is the HMIS we need to deal with. There is the RCH portal, the IDSP. So Kiran and, I think a lot of people who are working in the government, they will have to bring this together at some level. Somewhere they need to start talking to each other, and the data needs to come together. So I'm going to stop there, and happy to continue, but I'm really excited. And thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I think it's absolutely critical. And I can tell you, I think for PATH, at least for the organization that I work with, over the next 3 years, disease surveillance is going to be right up there in our list of priorities of what we're going to do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Neeraj. You brought two very important points. I will bring, for that particular point, I will bring Dr. Varanasi in. But Kiran, I would like to put you in a tight spot here. So Neeraj kind of started his conversation saying that the disease surveillance program, particularly in India, didn't work well to begin with. Okay, and I know many in my group who has been part of healthcare and public health domain for a long period of time has a similar kind of feeling. So since you have worked in this program, and you have been channelizing it for a long period of time, we would like to hear your honest opinion. We will not quote you outside, but we would like to know, what do you think, whether it has actually failed, or I know there are a lot of gaps still. We will talk about that, but what's your particular take on it, especially around COVID, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I think to be honest, when you look at the fact that COVID tools and COVID data collection was engineered so fast, I do think these tools could have talked to each other much better. The design could have been much better for information flow. There are lots of challenges that we have in terms of data reconciliation and tracking, which I think when we were actually investing in the systems, and this simply happens because, again, various departments, ICMR built one tool and then the MOHF built another tool. We don't really have good initial data integrations that didn't happen. And so in any case, with technology and with all of us technology people, we all were always, there's always much more and much better things that we can always do. I do want to just take on this one point that Neeraj brought about, right? So the fact that the data in most of our public health programs exist in silos, and then there is a very large private sector which doesn't usually contribute data, is our reality, right? So that's the situation that we are dealing with. And I heard Neeraj say that India Stack happened quite quickly. I just want to share that it was actually a 10-year journey, right? So by the time we got to 500 million Aadhars, it was already 6 years, I think. And then, of course, the next billion happened pretty fast. UPI, by the way, the success story of India Stack is also about in its 7th year now. So, I do think that these large-scale transformations take time. But what is important is to get the basic design right and get the incentive alignment for kind of everyone to participate. So happy to share with you, Neeraj, that one of the things that we are actually doing is trying to make sure that, so, I talked about the idea that in NDHM, we start with the fact that anybody creating health data should first start by sharing it with the patient. So even if you look at, say, the TB program, the RCH program. So RCH program maintains immunization records for almost 100 million kids. So does CoWIN now, in terms of maintaining data, right? So it's quite important that they all share their health data with their patients by linking it to their health ID so that you're starting to create longitudinal records. So this is an initiative that has actually started. So what you will see over the coming year is that for anybody going and taking treatment in any public hospital or receiving care in any public health program, if they are creating any health data, ANC data, immunization data, TB data, you'll start seeing that being shared with the patient. And not only from the public sector, you'll see the same thing happening from the private sector too. But it's the same rails that also lets you now say, okay, hey, you don't need to collect data separately for your HMIs. If you are doing this one integration where you're sharing with the patient, the technology approach that we are taking also says, okay, I can give you the counts for how many of them by whatever age group and gender you wanted, while maintaining full preservation of privacy, full alignment with the personal data protection bill, and making sure that the data is kind of available for policymakers. And so we hope that that will form the base for the next disease surveillance area. So Sumit, I would like you to go back to Dr. Sudhakar, and then we can come back to this topic.
Sure, very well. And just to let you know that there's a poll that has been running right now while we have been engaging in this insightful topic. And let me tell you that the question was put up that if we had better disease surveillance system in India, would the situation better be, India would have handled COVID-19 better? Around 75% say yes. So they are looking forward to have a more robust disease surveillance system in India, Kiran. So hoping that, we all can deliver that to citizens of India. So thank you for your work on that aspect. Now, Dr. Varanasi, I would like to bring you in, and we will take it up from where Neeraj left. He talked about two very important aspects. One, the scaling up. Of course, disease surveillance program would be there. It can be integrated with the primary health system, but it's very important to scale up. The country or all the systems can be integrated with it. You have been a pioneer in scaling up, public health operations with your initiative 108 ambulance service. So we would like to know about that, how we can do that. That's my first question. And second question is more around, in terms of the role of private sector. Alone, data can be, of course, for this program, data is mostly collected from public sector or hospitals, maybe at a primary health service level. But how a private sector can play a secondary as well as a very important role in it. So it's very important to know how we can do that, and what are the steps various organizations in India need to execute. So we'd like to know your views on these two important aspects, Dr. Sudhakar.
Okay. I see there are two big questions there. Sumit, I'll try and answer one at a time. First, let me take the scaling up. Scaling up, first, it depends on the specific problem, specific project that you're trying to scale up. But at a broader level, at a meta level, all scaling up projects that I've seen need to understand something at a more fundamental level, at a very common sense level. Scaling up does, whenever I talk to some small project companies or startups, the first thing that comes to their mind when they talk about scaling up is we need more money to scale up. But that's just one component. Funds or financial support is one part. You want to make sure that the demand scales up. You want to make sure that the processes scale up. You want to make sure that technology scales up. You also want to make sure that the people who are doing this project, the personnel, doing the operations, doing the management, they also scale up. You have to keep in mind all these aspects. If you look at it from that point of view, if you can scale up technology with a good user interfaces, with ease of use, and proper privacy assured to all the customers and citizens, and to the hospitals that where the data is first taken from, that itself is an important step. But that alone won't do. You have to have technology. Without technology, you can't scale up for sure. We were just talking a few minutes ago that Bhutan has a wonderful system of, one of the best systems of primary healthcare in this world, in this part of the world. But they can get away with it by training people with even without technology because its total population is under 7 lakhs of people. Whereas in India, the numbers being what they are, we need technology. Without this, we just cannot scale up in reasonable time. So technology is important. The people who are in the operations and the management, their scaling up is also important. Financial rewarding system, if the private sector is involved, is also important. The demand has to certainly exists in this country. COVID has enhanced the demand and put it up in a microscope. You can see it very clearly. There's a huge demand. We didn't know that this kind of demand was there, but I've been talking about disease surveillance for about 4 or 5 years now as an important step we to take. So scaling up requires reassuring that assuring that all these components are taken care of, especially training to use technology, training to respond with the proper data in the real time is all very important, and we have to pay attention to these things. Now, in 108, we have done many of these kind of things, which is why it succeeded. We have learned to work with the government. One of the problems is that many people in many civilized countries, they don't like working with the government. Now, we have to overcome that kind of extraordinarily narrow perspective of life. India is a huge country. The government is a great player, is an important player here. We have to learn to work with them and learn to provide the kind of structure that government needs to enable the legal process, the legal support they can give has to be channelized so that it helps us. We have to play a part in making that happen. But advise the government, take the government along with us. It's not you versus us. It's you along with us attitude that we need to have. So this is what we did in 108. There are many things. We chose the granularity well. We chose one state, did a fairly good job of making sure that the quality of the service was good in 108. And then we scaled it up to many other states. The granularity choice was very good at that time, because in one state you have roughly the similar language. In 108, somebody calls for an emergency. We don't need, if it is from a totally different state, faraway state, we may not even know what they are speaking because India has so many languages and so on. So we chose one state at a time, and the success of that and the reception and the kind of impact it had, not only in the people who received the service, but also on the bureaucrats and on the political systems, because they were getting re-elected on the basis of this. So they encouraged us. A number of things just continued, flowed in beautifully and segged well for us to make this happen. I see similar possibilities with the current scenario with COVID. If disease surveillance program has to take on, yes, we can. Now I come to the second part. We have to have the private sector involved in this. And how does the private sector get involved? One is the use of technology should be easy. It should not be an additional burden on them in a big way. It should not be difficult for a small organization that's providing, let's say, diagnostic services to input that data at the end of the day in a simple format so that they can be uploaded. The more complex it gets, the more misalignment with the private sector, and they won't be able to do that. We need both the legal system supporting and demanding it from the private sector, and also we need ease of use, and they also have to be incentivized for the service that they are doing. It's a tremendously important part to get all these private players to input their data. In a large country like ours, all the data has to flow in beautifully into the central system. That takes that's so important for us because we can see the big patterns very quickly and act on it. Because it's important, we should also incentivize in a small way the private sector. Between these two methods, legal requirement and the data ease of use, and thirdly, the small amount of incentivization will make this happen. That's my knowledge. That's my understanding of this. Over to you, Sumit.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Varanasi. So you're absolutely correct that the primary source of healthcare for majority of households in India is around urban, around 60-65%, I must say. Okay, and hence it becomes of utmost importance to expand surveillance activities to involve private healthcare, providing clinics, hospitals to capture the data. Okay, and I am assuming that the participation of the private health practitioner in sharing the data with IDSP is quite weak as of now. Okay, but I would like to continue, your thoughts on this, Dr. Varanasi, that how can that linkage be strengthened? How can we have more and more private health practitioners, occupational and environmental health specialists, maybe veterinarians, for example, come into the picture and collaborate more with IDSP to bring a true disease surveillance program in front of everyone. So how can that happen? I think you must have surpassed this kind of a challenge while you were working for 108 service as well. So how do you think we can do that?
We need to address the concerns of the private players. This is, for instance, this happened in 108. Many of the hospitals felt that by introducing an ambulance system, we are taking away their patients that were coming to them earlier. Emergency services is a big source of income for big hospitals. And they thought we were not going to share that, and we might share those people that were coming to them with many other hospitals. Therefore, their revenues would be diluted. We had to reassure them that is not. In fact, we were catching many more thousands of emergency victims who were not getting any medical attention. We were catching them in time to be able to provide them support, and so everybody's hospital business also enhanced in ways that they could not imagine. After a little bit of skepticism and looking at the numbers, everybody fell in line with us, because we were beginning to help people in emergency services, in emergency times. We were helping hospitals. We were helping all the stakeholders by overcoming their cynicism. One of the things that we wanted to make sure in 108 activities planning was to make sure all the stakeholders come along. And for that, you have to talk to the stakeholders, overcome their cynicism about a large-scale project like this. But I think what we have an advantage right now is everybody can see the importance of disease surveillance across the nation because of COVID times. It's given to you in a silver platter now. Nobody needs to talk about it as, make a case for it. We have a tremendous responsibility. We don't even know tomorrow if any of us are going to get COVID in this thousands of people that are there in the audience today or in the stage today. Anybody can get. So the importance is already known. All we have to do is to learn to catch this wave to our advantage and talk to all the stakeholders, get them enrolled, get them empowered, make ease of use of technology a primary mechanism for entering the data. And if they have any problems, there should be somebody resolving those things. And India, for all the diversity that we have, Indians fall in line very well, in my opinion, in my social understanding of things. I've been involved in some transformations. If they understand that it is important for them, for their families, for their survival, for their livelihoods, and for the nation as such to prosper, we need this, they will rally around. But you have to address their concerns. Over to you, Sumit.
Thank you, Dr. Varanasi, for your thoughtful insight. So I see a lot of questions coming in the Q&A section, which we will take up at the end of the discussion. I would urge all audience members to keep on, putting the question into the Q&A section. You can direct it to specific panel also, and we will take it up after 20 minutes. So thank you for that. And we do not want this discussion to be a kind of a monologue between 3 or 4 panelists. We always want our engaging audience to be involved in it. Okay, so we want to know more from you. So we have an audience member. Her name is Barnali Banerjee, and I would like to have her thoughts, on a particular aspect that has been raised by all 3 of our panelists. Okay, so Barnali, can we have her on the screen here so that we can all take a look at her, and then we can have a brief discussion with her. Barnali, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. Barnali, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for joining us. So brief Barnali Banerjee. She is joining us from West Bengal. She has expertise in data analysis, okay, and she is the Chief Research Officer for Mission Arogya Health. And in her past instances, she has also been working in the International Vaccine Institute. So thank you, Barnali, for joining us this afternoon. And my question to you is that, all of our elite panelists kind of agreed that there are some gaps in the existing disease surveillance program. Okay, not only for COVID, but overall from all disease perspective. So I would like to know from your viewpoint that what are these gaps? Maybe you can name 3 and 4. Okay, that comes to your mind, and how these gaps can be addressed. So we'd love to hear your viewpoints on that.
Thank you, all the panelists and all the audience. I get pleasure to hear in this this program. My experience in this field is that I think there is a gap in capacity buildings and the data guidance and the gender bias. I think so because I am a data manager. My experience in last 18 years in the data management and data analysis, and also I am working in the field also. Whatever I gain the knowledge from the fields and the data collector, there are some, I think there are some gaps are there. They are I think monitoring and evaluation is there. The knowledge and practicing is the problem is there. And also the problem, I think, is the data the understanding of the data, what they are collecting, who are the data collector, or everybody need to understand about the data. Whatever data is collected, the data collector also accessing the data and interpret the data. And otherwise they are collecting the data, but the proper feedback are not coming from the superior person, and the this is the, I think, main problem. Another is the in the field is the decision making and the gender bias also, when and the hesitancy. If when the general people are convey their disease related information, if they are not comfort, if we are not creating any comfort zone, then they are not really not to want to participate or give to address the real data. I think this is the gap I am feeling from the and I think the capacity building is the main issue for the data for all the fields. The capacity buildings, because the health worker are going to visit house to house, or if we are going any the tertiary hospital, if we are asking some health related issue, if there is the correct approach is not happening, then you are not getting the right data from them.
Okay. So I see that you are pointing out on manpower training, lack of manpower training, to say in correct words, and capacity building and gender bias. So these are the major areas or gaps that you see in.
And data understanding. The data collector should understood their data. At least whatever they are collecting, they understand, interpret the data. I think there is I think there is the lack or the gaps. I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you, Barnali, for sharing your thoughts and coming onto the platform and talking to us. Thank you very much. Thank you. So Neeraj, I see you nodding a lot when Banali was talking. Okay, so I'm assuming that you relate to the issues that she has told us at a very ground level. These are very ground level, basic gaps or hindrances that personal like people who collect data, who work at a very ground level see. So I know that path has worked a lot in that direction. So I would like to know from you, if you agree with such kind of gaps, or there are anything else that comes to your mind, and more importantly, how we can address this. Can we develop a robust infrastructure around it using technology or maybe non-technology, just like training, these data collectors and analysts at a very basic level? Can we overcome such issues?
Thanks. Yes, I was
Neeraj, we can't hear you. There's a lag.
Because from the ground, it's great to hear from Banali, because
Neeraj, can you hear us? I think there's some technical issue. Let's
the front line.
Okay, so I think till Neeraj kind of settles his tech issue. Neeraj, are you back?
Unfortunately, a lot of us, including myself, we don't always.
Neeraj, can you hear us? Hello.
Hi, can you hear me now? No.
Neeraj.
Fine, but I think you can't hear me. You just go to the next speaker, I'll come back.
Great. So while Neeraj comes back solving his issue, Kiran, I would like to bring you into the picture again. Okay, a very pertinent question came to my mind while we were going through, this discussion, that this disease surveillance program, or IDSP popularly known as, it actually serves a large health interest. Okay, and it's not easy to kind of run a program for a country which has 1.
I think we lost Sumit too.
Billion people.
Yeah.
Okay. Most of them living in rural areas. Okay. So this.
We lost you for 30 seconds there, Sumit.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now, Kiran? Okay. So I will repeat my question. So I was saying that it's not easy to manage such a program for a large country like ours, and often the data that is there collected as part of this program is often processed without the consent of individuals. Okay. And given the size and the scale, the role against COVID-19 of this program and its collection of large amount of sensitive personal data, how do you think this legitimate data protection concerns which might arise can be tackled? Do you think integration with the personal data protection bill is feasible and a sustainable approach? So I would like to know your viewpoints on how the security of the health data is being catered to and addressed when we talk about such surveillance programs.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point, and I think also would like to talk a bit about access to data as another problem, because it's quite hard usually for the overall ecosystem to get data when it's a government collecting data. It usually stays with the government, and the results are usually within the government, and you see only what release. So just on the whole process, right? So if you have been studying the personal data protection bill, the personal data protection bill has been quite clear in the draft bill, which is in Parliament, talks about this construct where anybody who has personal data, and so let's say a lab has or a hospital has a personal data, and it usually is creating the data on your behalf. What rights do you have over it? And what can they do with it, and what they can't do with it without your consent, right? And so if you look at the National Digital Information, the architecture that we have evolved, it is primarily fully aligned with this idea that if you want to be able to access that health data for any purpose, it has to be able to do that with your consent, right? So that's one part. But remember that this applies primarily only to personal data. That means personally identifiable data. When you aggregate data, so let us say, for example, if every lab were to just say how many dengue tests it did yesterday and how many of them were positive, and it actually reported that in some standardized way, right? And not just for dengue test, it could be doing this for HbA1c test, saying how many were outside the normal range. For every test it did, it could report aggregated data counts. This does not come under the Personal Data Protection Act. It actually comes under, there is a committee that's been set up by under Chris Gopalakrishnan, which is actually looking at what's called as the non-personal data. But aggregated data would be a very important and a very interesting and a high value thing in this ecosystem of disease surveillance. Simply because if you think about it, most of the healthcare that is digital, the lab side is actually the highest digitalization. It's very rare today, including in small towns, for you not to see a lab report that is on a printout. So somewhere some computerization has happened and the data is already digital. What we are really saying is that there needs to be one more upgrade to that lab software, so that it actually becomes what we call as NDHM compliant. And making yourself NDHM compliant gives you two things. One, it makes sure that you're compliant with the upcoming Personal Data Protection Bill. Two, you participate in this aggregated data infrastructure that I'm talking about. Now, aggregated data, our current views, while it's still in development, the current thinking is there is importance to have privacy protection, not just for the individual, but also the provider. You do not want, no lab wants data to be out in public as to how many tests it did. So even that will need to be privacy protected, which means that any data you create and aggregate and share will have to be at a level which is at certain level of geography where you cannot trace back or identify the specific lab, at least in whatever is released in public. The second thing is there has to be a lot of clarity on who has access to this data and how can the ecosystem actually get access to it. So one of the recommendations that we have is that for such data streams, we must consider what's called the ND-SAP ASP policy, which is the open data set policy. The government has a recognized policy that anything that can be in public interest should actually be released as open data sets. And so one of the things that we hope will happen as these rails come out is to make sure that much of this data that is being collected will actually be available for pretty much anybody in the ecosystem who kind of wants to. I'd like to just add a bit about, talk a bit about the adoption problem. It is absolutely right that, given the fragmentation, the large number of players, the huge country that we have, so many systems, this is not easy to get every system to change, right? So there has to be a clear approach on how do we tackle it. I'll just give you a sense of how are we tackling it right now so that we can get it, right? So we break up the overall ecosystem into three large cohorts, what we call as public health systems. And so in public health systems, it's actually easier to tackle it through the stick approach. You can have top-down directives which essentially drive change in IT systems in the public health sector. So that's something that you see we are doing. We are doing direct engagement with organized corporates. So organized corporates is a large part of, but still a very small percentage of the overall private health ecosystem, but they have significant IT infrastructure. And it is not that they are not sharing health data with their patients today, right? So the only change, so if you probably had a COVID test in the last year, you probably got an SMS, you probably went to the lab's website, you're able to put a code and you are able to download your report as a PDF. What we are saying is that, hey, apart from doing that, why can't you link that with that health ID so that it becomes part of the longitudinal record? And why can't it be in a standard machine readable format so that it becomes useful for processing? And so we can do all of these aggregated data and other kind of interesting things in the pipeline. So the second large engagement that we are doing is with this organized corporates. And the third group that we are dealing with are anybody making any kind of a software for either labs or hospitals. So I'll give you an example. For example, there is this company now called Trilio Health, used to be called Live Health. One change in their software, and they are able to light up 4,000 labs which use them, right? So it requires a few players who play this layer in the front with the IT. And the key thing is we are thinking very hard about the changes are happening where there has to be very little behavior change for the practitioner. I know that it's not going to be easy to get doctors to start suddenly filling out OP consultation notes and digital prescriptions. So that's going to happen the last. But it is far easier to get diagnostic reports, discharge summaries, much of which is already digital. to actually come in. And if you think about just these two pieces of information, it can be, and if it can actually get the data to flow, I think it will be a great start for a disease surveillance.
Definitely. I was not aware of these three programs that you mentioned at the last. Kiran, very well put up. I like the way you were saying that they are working with organizational labs at the front end. Okay, so that the data privacy issue can be catered. I think that's a long way. That can help in a long way to address such an issue for specifically for a country like India, which has such a huge population, and maybe other nations can also take a cue out of it. So thank you for that. Neeraj, we lost you, okay, but I'm back, and you are back. I'm back with my question, but I will give a twist to that question. Okay, earlier I asked you in terms of the existing gaps which Barnali kind of put forward. What were your views on that? I would like to know from you that what role the structured and unstructured data, either we capture it through digital media like social media or weather data and the technology, can play in disease surveillance, okay? And what are the steps that you see can be taken ahead for improving the infrastructure around collection of the structured and unstructured
data? Thanks, Sumit. Yeah, quickly on the last question that you had, quick point on that I think, the challenge has been that surveillance has been a subject which the central government has been pushing very hard from, the Ministry of Health and all the rest of the paraphernalia, but the states haven't really found the importance. I think with COVID, that's changed. And the capacity that we need in the states and down below, that's got to be built. And that's, I think, just responding to Barnali's point, that's what we need. We need those people on the ground who are going to make sure that we get the data. At the moment, it's pretty much non-existent. We're doing a lot of work on malaria data out of UP, for example. Very little data that we've got, which is reliable. So that needs to build, and we need to build that quickly. On your point on, the whole issue of the PDP and data coming in, etc. I think there are two things that I just want to point out. And, I know that the PDP should be cleared pretty soon. It's a great, robust document from where we're seeing it. I think it should be good. And again, on Kiran's conversation around aggregated data, aggregated data actually helps decision making for public health professionals. It should be able to give you enough information to make larger public health decisions. But when we are going into more micro sort of minute details, then you need line lists. And those line lists, I think one of the things that needs to be built in is this whole thing of consent. Mm-hmm. How does consent work? And, Kiran already talked about it, that we are initially, sorry, that was a nice big bumblebee which was trying to get on to my screen. But we're already looking at how this is going to, how are we going to deliver information to the patient, and in the process also get certain sort of a consent for part of that data to be used. You're also talking about things like social media. I was at the Google campus about 2 years ago in San Francisco when I still could fly. And there they had about 100 people working on just this. They were like, people are on social media, they're on the internet, trying to get information that may be able to give us some predictive analyses, etc. There's a lot of work also happening on, I know for the TB data, for example, looking at artificial intelligence to start predicting disease breakouts, epidemic breakouts or stuff like that. So there's a lot of that, and that will get triangulated as we move forward. So a lot of confusion there. I think just to sort of close on that, I think the first question is, do programs, agencies, all of us in the sector, do we need data or to move forward? And absolutely we do, which needs to be built. For that, do we need consent? And do we have consent? We need consent. We don't have consent. It's being built, needs to be built. I think most importantly also is that if we want to really have a robust system, how are we going to set up those levels? And can any program function without data? It can't. So Nikshay, for example, has a complete line list. but we don't have proper consent information coming in. So I think that needs to be put together. That'll help the larger cause of being able to use data for decision making, for predictive analysis, to ensure. I saw in the question box while I was half offline, I saw somebody saying that if we do have this data, what about the supply side of it? The point is, we were not even able to predict how many beds of oxygen we will probably need. We were doing that on Excel sheets during the last wave. So a lot of that would come in with the predictive, I would say.
Yeah.
I'll stop there. Back to you, Sunil.
Okay. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Thoughts, sharing the thoughts with us. I totally agree with you on that aspect. And fortunately, India already has a program, which is quite, I would say, it has been doing well in the past. Just to address few gaps, and it can really do well in controlling diseases like COVID in future, or maybe a future wave. And of course, the lead time from getting data from local authorities is a lot. Okay, but there is a need to digitize the program, which Kiran rightly pulled in, and he talked about how it's happening, how the stack is getting integrated, how they are taking care of the security, the data security issue. Okay, and the integration should definitely accelerate the growth of the disease surveillance program. So with this, I would like to end the discussion in the interest of time. I have a few more questions, but we can go on and on and on. But I would like to take questions from our lovely audience as well, okay, so that we can address this specific. I see a lot of questions being put up here. Suman, would you like to come into the picture and take it up?
Yes. I'm there, Sumit.
Great, thank you.
I see a few of them, and this one is from Anshuman, who is working with UNICEF. He has asked that does this pandemic situation in India, I mean, he's reframed this the way we had planned our poll. Does this pandemic situation in India could have been averted, reduced if our country might have developed a proper disease surveillance mechanism for all communicable diseases and special disease surveillance unit at all international entry point? Also, will it be good if the IDSP of India could be overhauled and redesigned as integrated disease surveillance and management program with better resource availability, especially human resources with better HR policy and power up to district or block level? So quite interesting.
I like the second part of the question. Kiran, would you like to address that?
Not the full expert on it, but my understanding was in the very early stages of COVID, when it first came into India, we didn't have the tools for surveillance. Sometimes you are dealing. There's I think a difference when you are dealing with the known and when you are dealing with the unknown. And I remember the initial period was really about how can we scale RT-PCR. I mean, it took quite some time. Chasing down how many machines we have which are RT-PCR compatible. Where are you going to? Can you trust this little test that is coming? And the fear factor. So I am not fully certain that in this case we could have avoided it actually coming into the country, because I don't think we had the tools really to tackle it. Maybe if you say do it now, yeah, at this point, if the current tool set does not hide any of the variants and catches all variants, yes, I think you can have a reasonable program in terms of, I think, how it would. That's at least my viewpoint, but Neeraj or others?
Yeah. Sumit, I was just wondering, can I jump in at this stage?
Absolutely, please go ahead.
District level is the right unit, right kind of granularity that we should choose to make this kind of thing happen. But that question reminded me that when Ebola came in, and by the time people realized that it's a very dangerous pandemic that's about to break open, and when the government officials came in and closed in on the slum, people got scared and ran away because they thought it was like they were going to be jailed or something in the slums, and they carried the disease with them, and people had no idea where all they went. And I don't know if you recall the story. The people got innovative about it by Google coming into the picture and saying in some areas in that part of the country, Ghana, they found that a lot of requests on cough and fever coming up. And when that happened, that was that people realized that this is where the people have run to. So they came to that area and localized it in that area and got hold of the people who ran away from the original slums where it was detected. So we got to get a little creative, a little predictive about it by some tools that we already have, even if we don't have all the tools. And it's possible to do this kind of a thing. So I just brought in that story because that's an extraordinarily serendipitous thing that people thought about Google as an answer to the Google frequently asked questions as a solution to the problem. So we have to get, we are good at Jugaad. We have to figure out some solutions that work for us in this country before systems are in perfect place. But it's possible today with the kind of technology that I see in India, the algorithms that are available for predictive analytics, it's definitely possible to show the kind of patterns that are going to emerge in the third wave or whatever. Okay, so let's get the data now by innovative means if it is necessary. Over to you, Sumit.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you,
Dr.
Govanesi,
for putting in your thoughts.
All right, moving into the next. This is from Manjari Shankar, who is with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. She's asked, to what extent can we leverage the existing robust surveillance systems in place for VPDs like WHO's NPSP and measles, rubella to expand the scope of IDSP? Who would want to take this?
Neeraj, you want to comment on that?
I'm happy to comment on that because I work very closely on the entities. So yeah, thanks for that question. Absolutely, what NPSP created is extremely good. It is being expanded into the vector-borne diseases program and used to some extent. I think what's going to be more important for us is to say, okay, what is going to be that one platform and one standard operating system? Because unless we do that, we'll kind of be, broken about this. I would still put my bets on IHIP and see how we could integrate data from these multiple systems going into IHIP and that being sort of really the answer. But we'll have to see. I mean, I know that in UP, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, there is a lot of work happening around using NPSP and expanding that. But there is also contradiction and challenges with that. Thanks.
My 2 cents on that, Neeraj, is that we need both. Right? So you do need, the NPSP and the IDSP program. The fact that it has a very strong focus only on disease surveillance is actually super important. And I think added to that, we need to add the other data sources from the overall ecosystem to kind of support or bring in additional data, right? So because take example of TB, and which is the other thing, right? So TB tests do happen in both private and in the public ecosystem. And for the longest time, before the new set of incentives and NICSHI rolled out, much of the reporting from the private sector and the treatments from the private sector weren't really coming in into the system, right? So in some sense, I think looking at India as a whole, I think we have to find these methods which essentially get a collaborative kind of or an integrated rails, as I would call, between both public and private, not really see them as silos in terms of our approach.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Agree with you.
Thank you for that, gentlemen. The next one is from Dr. Vikram Venkateswaran. He would want to know, should we work on the functionality first and then start looking at data privacy? Yes, Kiran.
Absolutely not. We are going to get shot. I think the biggest issue with health data and even with NDHM is actually going to be privacy. It's not very far from some of these things going back to the Supreme Court. Aadhaar, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But I think it's a policy to, and I mean, this is a real issue even in, there are use cases from the West. NHS UK, there are stories of when in the big AIDS pandemic, people using data from the NHS to find out that somebody has AIDS and them losing their jobs, right? Mental health issues getting leaked out. there is enough sensitive data from abortions to many other things in health that privacy actually, in my mind, has to be front and center, part of the design, careful thought about it. In fact, I would rather be slower than faster and err on the side of privacy rather than not err on the side of the privacy, at least when it comes to health data. Because fixing it is not, my bigger issue is this, right? We are just at a point where we are saying, hey, let's democratize, let's unlock this health data which is in all of these sites. And if privacy issues start to come in now, the whole initiative could die, because you will have a fear saying, hey, we should not be doing this at all. And we could actually put an end to what we are trying to actually do in terms of unlocking the data. So I rather tread, more carefully on that rather than, on the side.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Kiran. The next question is from Prerit Mittal, and his question is, which country has the most efficient disease surveillance system? That's one. And what are the features that we can adopt from this system?
Sure. I can take a shot at it, Suman.
Yes, Suman.
I'm not sure. I cannot pinpoint one country, but in my experience, I think many of the countries has done well in the past, especially in COVID. I see a lot of disease surveillance activity using technology done by the US, Korea, Singapore, Germany, even smaller, European nations that take a cue from big nations and the developed technologies around it. So to pinpoint one, if you ask me, I think US has done well in the past as well. Okay. Now, in terms of the second question, that's the second part of the question was, what are the key features that we can take? I think there is a massive need to digitize the program at a very big scale. In India, maybe using mobile applications to begin with, which we are doing with the launch of our Arogya Setu and other aspects. But I think at a massive scale, we should leverage mobile applications, and leveraging digital and social media data is also a critical step. I feel that currently in India, we are not utilizing much of these data points, while the data from the hospitals and healthcare centers are genuine case records and resemble the structural data. But integrating these kinds of data points coming in from hospitals with the unstructured data, which comes from digital and social media sources, which give us the complete picture. So imagine how we can integrate structured data coming up from various hospitals and centers, plus the unstructured data, which I think we are not collecting well as of now. This unstructured data comes from digital and social media. So I have to combine these two aspects of the data, and then a comprehensive picture will come out, which will really augment the utilization and effectiveness of disease surveillance program. Just to add to this, I believe I worked with an organization that previously, IBM, which focuses a lot on technology, and they kind of used data from weather. So weather data points in different countries were used very effectively to kind of pinpoint certain outbreaks of certain infectious diseases. So I believe if we can utilize weather data also in determining and health and adding into the mix, will help us provide a very good, robust program. Anyone else who would like to add in? Please.
Yeah, anybody else would want to add anything to this? I think this was great, Dr. Sumit. Okay, moving on to the next. This is from Naveen. He wants to know that, can a team of doctors reach out to villages promoting mass surveillance? As understood, many of them are not reporting due to fear within the community. So is there a possibility of that happening?
Okay, mass surveillance is a very wrong term, by the way. So it can really create a lot of notions in someone's mind. But I got the point what Naveen is saying. So
yeah,
Dr. Sudhakar, would you like to take that up?
No, I haven't understood the question.
So he's basically,
can the doctors go to the village?
It's basically of awareness, spreading awareness about the disease surveillance, because Manjari also pointed out, Barnali and Neeraj also pointed out that at a very basic level, the awareness of such surveillance is not there. So how can that be overcome? Using a team of doctors?
I think this is a very important point. when you introduce a new way of looking at information, looking at the disease profile of India, there will be a number of questions, and there will be a number of cynical points of view from lower level people. So we need to have a separate mechanism to address them. People don't just jump into it just because because you think you have a good project. People have to be convinced that there is a lot to gain by this. For instance, I'll give you an example. 108, when it was started, everybody was cynical that it will never work in a country like India because the traffic is not good, very disorganized. So how will an ambulance ever get to the place in 10 minutes time was the question. So I finally had to introduce one question, saying if a pizza can be delivered in 10 minutes, why not an ambulance in 10 minutes? And actually, pizza can be delivered in 20 minutes. Why not an ambulance in 10 minutes, which is waiting for it? Pizza, you have to cook for it. This example, when it went around in many circles, including social media and also in newspaper articles and so on that were written on it, it triggered and overcame some of the cynicism that people had. So you should have a specialized program for building awareness in the country on what it takes, why it is important for us to report the data factually in a certain form, so that people can act on it. The data becomes information only when it's segregated in a certain way. And that is possible. Indians will understand. Now that social media is active, everybody has a cell phone, it's possible to get this information across. This awareness around. With millions of people scared of COVID now, you don't need an incentivization. You can easily spread the right message, but you should have a specialized group working on mass communication. Mass surveillance may not be right word, but mass communication is important at this stage. And there are several influencers. If Devi Shetty talks about it, I'm sure millions of people will respect him and take it forward. So you should identify about a dozen or so great influencers of health in the health sphere and get them to talk about it in various forums and get them to influence their circles, both in private and government circles. It will happen because the pan is open for everybody is ready for reception of some sensible way of looking at it. This is the perfect time for us to quickly do some propagation and take it forward. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Couldn't agree more on that point. Now, I don't see any other questions in the questions tab. There are certain questions which have been put which are broken, so I couldn't understand whether that's a question or that's a suggestion. So my request is, unless you have something which you can put in, I wouldn't be able to take up there. I have something from Juhi though. She wants to ask, what role can development partners play in future for improving the quality of disease surveillance in India in a team approach and not playing solo? Also, what needs to improve in IDSP according to all of you?
Hey, Neeraj, this is up your alley, boss.
Okay. As they say, this is beyond my pay grade, man. This is a very heavy question. What can be improved with IDSP? I think my only thing would be simplify as much as you can. Go after the data, which is absolutely required. How do you put it in the hands of the frontline? I think one more sort of message that I have is that that actually stems from the last question, which was on this whole thing of taboos and diseases and taboos around it. I thought that was the sort of direction that was going, and I think we've seen that in tuberculosis already. So we need to be very careful about. We also saw it in COVID, where a lot of people did not want to declare or did not want to actually tell people that they had COVID when they did. So that's another challenge. I think one more important point is that the government, in the case of TB specifically, we saw the carrot and the stick approach of disease surveillance, where every lab, every pharmacy which was dispensing medication for TB, every doctor, every quack, everybody had to report data in. and there are huge fines. It's a criminal liability. So there was that whole stick, and there was also the incentive that they would get in case they did report. And I think that's worked pretty well. I would say we're probably 70-80% there. So, but maybe I haven't answered all of Jui's questions. Sorry, Jui. Like I said, definitely don't have the answers to all those questions. Hopefully, we will as a group. In terms of NGOs, we will have to work with the system. We are waiting for certain things to set up in the system. We're happy. We should be working in states. The system is going to come into place, but implementing that is going to be a challenge, and I think that's where our role is. I'll stop.
Okay. Suman, I'll take that. Yes. I'm certainly it's above my pay grade too, but being an old man, I'll throw my hat in. One of the suggestions is that I think state as a right granule is not right for this surveillance. We have about 700 districts in this country. It used to be 625, I believe it's now 710 or so now. And because that's close enough to the ground realities, each district. State capital is not. Bangalore is not aware of all the things that are happening in the state. So if you can have a unit that's fairly functional, fairly autonomous, but functional, responsible for collecting the information about that district, with the legal powers that are required, with the kind of local language, familiarization of why this process is important. If you can strengthen it at that stage, instead of diktats coming from state capitals or even central Delhi or something, it's more likely to work. Because 700 districts will give us a fairly good idea of what's happening. Because what's happening in one district may not be representative of what's happening in some other district. That's one mistake that we are trying to do. We are doing now, in my opinion. We should strengthen it at the district level. Village is too small. We have 700,000 villages. We can't have units at that level. I think district is the right one. That's one suggestion I make. The other is, we have to address the concerns of all the stakeholders, each one of them, carefully and very quickly. It's right now, people will respond if you ask for what's bothering them. There are a number of things that we can address and make it move forward very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you.
And NGOs are very important in this kind of thing. They can play at the district level because they have presence in much more numbers than what private organizations can have.
Correct. Thank you, Dr. Varanasi. Thank you, Neeraj, for this. I think, Juhi, you got your pulse there from both these experts. Before we, come to you, Sumit, to summarize this, there is one last question that I'm picking up, which is from Manjari, again from the Gavi vaccine. Are there learnings from the Asian subcontinent that we can incorporate within the IHIP? Population aside, the people are behaviorally, culturally similar. Any region-wide survey forums, which India is a part of, like for MENA or something? Neeraj, would you like to take a bite at this?
Yeah, just a quick one. Manjari, I think Singapore, Hong Kong, these examples, Taiwan, Korea are good examples, but there's no way we're going to be able to, do what they're doing. We can't do that in India. I would strongly recommend we look at China. While we all love to hate China at the moment, but if you actually think about their disease surveillance system, it actually works. So maybe that's one could look at, and probably I'm not sure if it would really fit in, but
we are losing you there, Neeraj. Some disturbances.
In terms of the population, the size of the country, tuberculosis, malaria.
Thank you. I think you broke a little there towards the end, Neeraj, but I think we got the All right. With that, Sumit, I'll leave it open to you to summarize this wonderful track. I think it was an immensely insightful session, and I think we also had a chance to pick up some of very good questions from the audience and answer them, perfectly. Over to you now, if you could, summarize this entire thing. And,
sure. Great, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank our audience because it's very important to understand their viewpoints as well. So I saw a lot of engaging questions from them. So thank you, audience, for joining us from wherever you are. Okay, and just to summarize, I think I believe disease surveillance is something that has come very close to us now. It has become a very pertinent topic. Earlier, a lot of people who were not even aware of such a program existing in India. Okay, now people who are not even engaged in public health, or they are not even connected to healthcare by any which means, they are also interested in knowing about it. Okay, so this discussion that we had with our panelists kind of helped our audience to gain and understand the benefits of the disease surveillance, how different kinds of data can be interpreted and analyzed to facilitate the prevention and control of the disease, how the technology can come into the picture, what Government of India is doing by integrating in technology stack, and of course addressing the data privacy issue as well. So in all, I think we covered a lot of different aspects. Of course, we can go on and on and on about disease surveillance, but I think it's a very pertinent and very important area that we all need to focus upon. Okay, I would like to thank our elite panelists again for coming onto the platform and sharing their wonderful thoughts around it. Very interesting and engaging data points that we captured from each of the panelists. And thank you, IIT, for holding this this session with all of us. So thank you, Suman.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumit. I would like to thank the IIT's healthcare working group of the FutureTech panel, led by Ravi Ramaswamy, Ajit Ashok, Dr. Vikram Venkateswaran, and the team. They were the ones instrumental for curating this wonderful session and getting these experts together for a brilliant discussion today on disease surveillance. We also got a chance to run two polls. One, obviously, which was discussed about if we had a strong disease surveillance system in India, could this be better tackled? To which the answer was 82% said yes. The second one was, do you think technology is being effectively used for disease surveillance in India? To which 55% of the people said no, it has not been, while 30% of the people said yes, it has been done so. And I think we got some of those answers there within the discussion today, that how technology could be used better to create a robust system around disease surveillance in India. With that, I would like to thank all of you, all the speakers, for giving us this time today and sharing their perspectives and their insights with the audience and us. I'm sure the audience had a lot to learn and a lot to implement. Thank you to the audience for joining us from various places in India, as well as from other countries as well, like Geneva and other places. We would urge all of you to still stay safe. I am sure the lockdowns are being eased now in various parts of India. Doesn't mean that you flock at the shopping malls and go around doing the things that you used to do in the past. It is very much here. The COVID is still here, and we would urge you to take care of yourselves and your dear ones, follow social distancing, and stay safe. We'll see all of you again on the 25th of June with our next webinar, which is on use cases of connectivity with 5G in India. And until then, I wish all of you a great weekend. Take care, stay safe. Thank you, audience. Thank you, speakers. It was a pleasure having all of you here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.